Hi, I'm Tony Denbach, and I'm the lead pastor for Clearview Community Church. Today, I'm continuing in a series that's simply called Ask. It's based on questions from people in our community, just like you. This series is designed to start a conversation, one in which we'd love to have you participate. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to add, please be sure to send us an email or give us a call. Today's question is, hasn't science proven that we don't need God? Now, the Bible begins with these words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." For some, those words are beautiful and powerful and awe-inspiring. For others, it may as well be a declaration of war. Now, I grew up in a Christian home and was brought to church almost every week of my life. I was raised on a steady diet of the Bible, and I believed that it was true. But as I entered my teen years and began to encounter science class and evolutionary theory and naturalism, I began to have a real crisis of faith. These were smart men and women, my teachers, who were telling me, or at least inferring, that I was a product simply of millions of years of evolution. There was no God who had made me. Charles Darwin had discovered through his research that all life on Earth had evolved from the very simplest bacterium in a primordial soup countless millions of years ago. Now, the implications of this theory also affected my history classes, my geography classes, and others. It was one of the factors in causing me to stop attending church as a teenager to try to make sense of it all. Now, on the one hand, I knew that God was real, but on the other hand, there were a lot of very smart people that I highly respected who seemed convinced that he wasn't. It seemed like in those days that Darwinism was an airtight explanation for our existence. But was it? And is it? The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 1, verse 20, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." As I said, the question for today is this: hasn't science proven that we don't need God? Now, I'm often asked this question or questions like it. And the assumption behind the question is that people of faith, in this case Christians, are anti-science and that there is a war between Christianity and science. Is that true? First of all, we need to remember that appearances can be deceiving, and we need to go into these discussions with our eyes wide open. I think it's a good question, but I think to answer it, we have to peek behind the curtain and understand the terms. See, the dictionary defines science as the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Now, the scientific method is one of experimentation and observation. It's the study of how things work. Far from being anti-science, modern science arose within Christian civilization, and many have argued as a result of Christian civilization. Charles Colson wrote that the great figures of the scientific revolution, Mendel, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and Boyle, were all profound Christians. Newton wrote far more on theology than any other subject, and Boyle sponsored Christian missions and translations of the Bible into far-flung languages. As one sociologist wrote, alchemy developed in China, but chemistry in the West. The historical record belies the reckless statements of Hitchens and Dawkins and other anti-theists that faith opposes reason and is anti-science. The truth is, the scientific method owes its existence to Christianity. Christian influence led to the establishment of the first universities, not just trade schools as had been the case in China, but communities of scholars where knowledge could be pursued because it was good for human beings to learn. The first two universities were in Paris and Boulogne in the middle of the 12th century. Oxford and Cambridge followed shortly thereafter, and then the university spread through Europe. Christians also developed public education, fueled by the faith's embrace of equality as well, as all were created in God's image. The Oxford motto is from Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light." So yes, faith and science can coexist. In fact, science thrived within the Christian culture. But let's look a little deeper at this question. Often there are assumptions underlying the question that aren't admitted. Now, what I mean by that is that for many, science has come to equal naturalism. Now, naturalism by definition is a philosophical viewpoint according to which everything arises from natural properties and causes, and supernatural or spiritual explanations are excluded or discounted. In other words, this new definition of science excludes the very idea of God. That is the claim. But there's a huge difference between a claim and a truth. There's a big difference between philosophy and science. Now, here's a warning for all of us. When you make up your mind before looking at the evidence, you're in trouble. Now, the new definition of science based on naturalism is what many researchers and scientists have come up against, as they have simply tried to follow where the evidence leads them. For many, doing so has resulted in professional suicide, as they have been summarily dismissed or demoted. For example, biologist Carolyn Crocker was banned from teaching evolution at George Mason University after merely mentioning intelligent design. Evolutionary biologist Richard Steinberg was demoted by the Smithsonian Institute after he approved an article that supported intelligent design. Intelligent design proponents would say that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause, not an undirected process, such as natural selection. This has been called pseudoscience by many because it moves away from the assumption of naturalism, and that is simply not allowed. Now, here's the way that Philip Johnson put it in his book, Objections Sustained. If science has exclusive authority to tell us how life was created, and if science is committed to naturalism, and if science never discards a paradigm until it is presented with an acceptable naturalistic alternative, then Darwin's position is impregnable within science. Holding an alternative view is dangerous. Now, one of the most prominent cases was that of Guillermo Gonzalez, an astronomer and physicist with impeccable credentials. He has had 68 peer-reviewed articles published. His groundbreaking research in astronomy has led to the discovery of 2 new planets. Yet when he wrote a book giving evidence that the Earth is uniquely situated to sustain life, over 400 faculty members of universities across Idaho petitioned his university to deny him tenure, and they did. Simply put, you're not allowed to arrive at any conclusions that do not arise from a naturalistic worldview. To me, this is not a scientific position. This is what is called scientism, the religion of science. Now, Ian Hutchinson, professor of nuclear science and engineering at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, defines it this way. Scientism is the belief that science is all the real knowledge there is. Now, this is philosophy, not science. What is remarkable to me is that there are so many Christians who are scientists in spite of the odds. People like Bill Phillips, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, and Francis Collins, the second director of the Human Genome Project, which is charged with mapping out the information found in human DNA. The British mathematician Dr. John Lennox said that he has several Christian friends who are the heads of science departments at Oxford University, including biomedical sciences and nanotechnology. So it is possible to survive in that hostile environment, but you've got to be prepared to take the heat. Now, some believe this is a battle about evolution, but it's not. See, there are actually many devout Christians who believe in the theory of evolution, that God used the mechanics of evolution in the creation process. I think it's interesting to read the different viewpoints. Well, here's what I know about evolution. See, the word evolution means change. And of course, microevolution is something that is easily observed and demonstrated. For example, dog breeders over generations of selective breeding can enhance certain characteristics of a breed or diminish others. What has not been demonstrated is speciation, the ability to evolve from one species to another, or macroevolution, the big leaps. Even the Cambrian explosion seems to indicate that thousands of life forms arrived fully mature at the same time. Well, how did that happen? That's a good question. So the real battle, as I see it, is not between science and Christianity. It's actually between theism and atheism. There are 2 sides in this battle. God is or God isn't. Those are the 2 presuppositions. But what naturalists would have you believe is that their presupposition is scientific and ours is not. Now, I don't buy that for a moment. Listen to what Bertrand Russell had to say. What science cannot explain, humanity cannot know. Now, he was a brilliant man in some ways, but this is not a logical statement. As John Lennox said, this is not a statement of science. Therefore, if it's true, it's false. It doesn't make sense, not logical. There are many things that science will never tell us. Why am I here? Where do I come from? What is the purpose of life? See, the curious thing about math and science is that it leaves out almost everything that we think is important. The atheists have tried to answer these questions, but their answers have led rather to despair. Here's what Aldous Huxley had to say. Science does not have the right to give to me my reason for being, but I am going to take science's view because I want this world not to have meaning. A meaningless world frees me to pursue my own erotic and political desires. Well, I guess he's being honest anyway. George Bernard Shaw is perhaps most renowned as a freethinker and liberal philosopher. In his last writings, we read, "The science to which I pinned my faith is bankrupt. Its counsels, which should have established the millennium, led instead directly to the suicide of Europe. I believed them once. In their name, I helped to destroy the faith of millions of worshipers in the temples of 1,000 creeds. And now they look at me and witness the great tragedy of an atheist who has lost his faith." Ravi Zacharias touched on the challenges to pure naturalism at his Summer Institute in July of 2015. He said that atheists will agree that in order to explain everything, they only have to cross these gaps. Number one, how did we get life from non-life? Number two, how did we get consciousness from non-consciousness? Number three, how did morality develop? And number four, how did sexuality develop? As Ravi would say, yes, please explain those things. See, science says from nothing, nothing comes. And yet, here we are. Some would say that huge strides are being made in the effort to reproduce life in the lab, and there are huge strides being made in molecular mechanics, etc. But now try to do that with no raw materials. See, is there anything within science that Christians can be excited about? Is there a reason for us as Christians to encourage our children to go into the sciences, for example? Well, absolutely there is. See, cosmologists agree that the universe had a beginning, and this logically means that there must be a cause that transcends the universe. Evidence seems to point now to creation ex nihilo, which is creation from nothing. It is a scientific fact that from nothing, nothing comes. Therefore, someone or something that is outside of the universe must have caused it. The God of the Bible fits that description perfectly. Now, some would argue that the Big Bang doesn't imply that the universe came from nothing, but from a singularity very tiny and very dense. But if that was matter, then it would also be subject to the laws of thermodynamics and must have also had a beginning. It just throws the question backwards, like speculations some have made about what is called an oscillating universe, one that keeps expanding and retracting. Eventually, you get back to the same question. Nobel Prize winner Arno Penzias, in a New York Times article, said about the beginning of the universe, "The best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole." Now, that's not me saying that. That's a Nobel Prize winner. Contemporary physicists have discovered that the laws of physics appear to be fine-tuned to permit life. In fact, Guillermo Gonzalez and others have determined that there are 122 variables that have to be in place in incredibly exact formulas in order for life to even be possible on this planet. Astrophysicist Eric Zachrisson, in 2016, published an article that stated that while there are an estimated 700 quintillion planets in the universe, there is only one like Earth. He stated that we've been dealt a fairly lucky hand. Now, on Earth, we need the water cycle to operate, for example, and we need the almost exact percentage of oxygen, to name just two. Our moon is just the perfect size and at the perfect axis to allow life to survive on Earth. We need the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, to soak up asteroid hits. We are the perfect distance from the sun, which just so happens to be the right kind of star and in the right period of its life cycle. On and on we could go about all of the variables that have to be within the narrowest of parameters to make life possible. This logically implies a designer who fine-tuned all of these variables. But don't take my word for it. Sir Fred Hoyle, a non-Christian himself, states this: a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Now, modern-day physicists have demonstrated that the position of the Earth in its solar system, in its galaxy, is ideal for the maintenance of life. The evidence seems to point to the fact that were it anywhere else, under any other circumstances, life would be impossible. Now, the laws of physics seem to have been designed to allow our planet, and perhaps only our planet, to sustain life. Psalm 19, 1 and 2 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." Now, molecular biologists have discovered complex information in the human cell, and that the origin of life itself required biological information. Now, I often ask people what they would do if their boat landed on an island thought to be uninhabited, and they came across the letters SOS spelled out in rocks in large letters on the beach. Each of them said that they would start to look for someone who was in need of help, because SOS is a well-known distress signal. 3 letters would tell them that. They would not assume that the ocean somehow, over time, created the recognized pattern. That is possible, but it's not likely. See, when Darwin first formed his theory of evolution, he believed that the cell was a very simple thing with a couple of components. In the notes on our website, I've included a link to a short video from Harvard University from a few years ago that illustrates the complexity of a simple human cell. I would have liked to have shown you some volumes from my office. 106 of them, in fact. I would have stacked them up. But the reason I would choose that number is so that you could visualize something. Scientists have now found a way to read human DNA, the information that is in each human cell. See, geneticists have discovered that the same methods of processing information, programs, and subroutines instruct our bodies as DNA and in our brains as neural networks. They now edit DNA as a software program by sequencing or decoding its meaning and intent. It's called the Genome Project. How much information is in one strand of DNA smaller than the tip of your little finger? Enough to fill 106 volumes of encyclopedias. Now, Richard Dawkins of Oxford, obviously an atheist, states this: the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. Stephen C. Meyer, who received a PhD from Cambridge University and is now the director for the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute in Seattle, said this: every experience we have about information, whether it's a computer code, hieroglyphic inscription, a book, or a cave painting, points toward intelligence. The same is true about the information inside every cell in every living creature. Now, if you want to tell me that time and chance wrote a complex code full of information that could fill a 106-volume set of encyclopedias, please feel free. But don't call that science. This logically points to an intelligent cause. Matthew 10, verse 30 says, "And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered." I believe that they literally are. Your DNA contains information about you, how tall you will potentially become, as well as your natural hair color, your eye color, your basic shape, and a million other details. Psalm 139 verse 14 says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Now, in 1992, The historian of science, Frederick Burnham, said the God hypothesis is now a more respectable hypothesis than at any time in the last 100 years. Now, some scientists and many philosophers may believe that Christianity and science are at odds. I disagree with that. True science is the pursuit of truth wherever it leads. I'm all for that. Just don't start out by saying that it cannot lead to God, because that's not science. That's presumption. There's a real contrast, however, between the naturalist and the Christian. See, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist and naturalist, spoke of building his life on the firm foundation of unyielding despair. Now, what does that even mean? Of his death, he pointedly referred to that moment as the night of nothingness. He notes, "There is darkness without, and when I die, there will be darkness within. There is no splendor, no vastness anywhere, only triviality for a moment, and then nothing." But the Apostle Paul, who came to Christ after persecuting the church and experienced a radical transformation, spoke of the end of his life in this way. He said, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." As he sat under house arrest, awaiting his execution at the hands of the Romans, he wrote to his young protege, Timothy, and said in 2 Timothy 4, verses 7 and 8, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." Now my faith is enhanced by true science, not hindered by it. And modern science grew out of a biblical understanding of the world around us. Here's an interesting stat. Over 65% of Nobel Prize winners in the 20th century believed in God. We are not enemies. Remember, when you make up your mind before looking at the evidence, you're in trouble. I believe the Bible to be true. I believe that Christianity and true science are friends, not enemies. I believe that God created this world and us for himself and that we messed it up. I also believe that he sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to redeem us and to restore us to relationship with him. This gives meaning to life. Would you pray with me? Father, we're thankful today for creation that reveals you. We can see you in it, how orderly it is, how complex it is, and it came from your mind. Lord, I thank you for science that reveals these things to us and makes them plain. I thank you that you can be seen in all of these things. And I pray right now for those who are searching for you, Lord, that you would open their eyes and help them to see. I pray that you would help them to ask the questions and to find the answers that they need. And I pray, God, that you would help us all to come to faith in you, to have a relationship with you, which is why you created us in the first place. We love you. We ask for your grace in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. So thank you for listening today. I hope, if nothing else, that I've made you think. Please reach out to us if you have questions or comments. God bless you.